The Zeroth Academy of Xenobiological Sciences was built on one principle above all else: caution. Every student, whether scaled, furred, or chitin-plated, was guaranteed safety within its halls, a sanctuary from the horrors of their own Deathworlds and even greater terrors of the galaxy. But, for all their meticulous planning, for all their sterilized classrooms and risk mitigation protocols, they had just admitted a human. Professor Zeltorx tried not to stare. There, among the rows of anxious alien students, sat the lone Terran, Elias Ward. He seemed completely oblivious to the palpable tension in the room, humming a strange tune while unpacking a notebook, a water bottle, and something that smelled faintly of roasted garlic. Zeltorx felt a nervous twitch. Humans and their food. Good morning, all. The professor began, his voice a little unsteady. Today, we start our 6-week module on toxic flora of high-risk Deathworlds. We will be reviewing specimens that, if mishandled, may induce paralysis, hallucinations, cellular liquefaction, or— Elias raised a hand. Yes, human Elias. Zeltorx asked, bracing himself. Is lunch allowed in class? A wave of distressed chirps echoed through the room. One student fainted. Outright, the organic ventilation system hissed in alarm before the professor could even formulate a response. Elias just shrugged and continued unwrapping whatever was inside a crinkly full packet. A new smell began to spread, silent and predatory. It was warm, sharp, spicy, and deeply, fundamentally wrong to every non-human nose present. Zeltorx pressed a trembling claw to his translator badge. Human Elias, please refrain. Oh, sorry, Elias said, flashing an apologetic smile. Didn't mean to bother anyone. It's just leftover lunch from home. Jalapeno garlic beef with fermented pepper sauce. The entire class physically recoiled. A small Helvarian student squeaked. Fermented, as in rotting. Elias blinked, confused. How? No. It's controlled fermentation. Brings out the heat. Controlled heat. A Lurkin warrior whispered, as if he'd just heard a new strategy for planetary bombardment. Zeltorx tried to regain control, quickly tapping a panel. A hologram materialized, showing a vine twisting with neon purple thorns dripping viscous acid. This, he said shakily, is the Zrenex blood vine, native to Deathworld 1-4R. Its thorns deliver a neurotoxin that causes complete organ shutdown in 30 seconds. The fruit can melt. Looks like a chili plant. Elias murmured from his seat. The class hissed in unison. The professor froze. Chili. Yeah, the human nodded. Except chilies don't melt your organs. They just melt your will to live for a minute or two. To emphasize his point, Elias casually produced a small, bright red pepper from a pocket in his lunchbox and bit into it. Gasps erupted. A raw medic frantically slapped a respirator onto his own face. A slithery student slithered backward so fast they collided with the wall, whispering, "He consumes it, alive." Zeltorx's neck frills puffed out in sheer distress. Human Elias, please. Eating hazardous organic material during a lecture on toxic flora is strictly prohibited. Elias paused his chewing. This isn't hazardous. It's just a snack. My mom grows these in her backyard. A tiny wisp of smoke seemed to rise from the bitten pepper. The professor felt his knees buckle. Desperate, he turned back to the hologram. As I was saying, the blood vine is one of the most dangerous plants known. It is responsible for the deaths of over 12,000 explorers. Though, that reminds me, Elias said brightly, digging back into his lunchbox. Full clanked. A container hissed open. A faint glow escaped from within. Every alien in the room instinctively ducked. Please don't glow, a student whimpered from under their desk. But it wasn't a bioluminescent hazard. It was a sandwich, slathered in something thick and orange. What is that? Zeltorx whispered, his voice barely audible. Oh, this, ghost pepper mayo. You want some? The professor staggered back several steps. That sauce, he croaked, is it weaponized? No, Elias said. looking genuinely confused. It's food. The classroom erupted into horrified whispers. He applies neurotoxins recreationally. He consumes volatile acids raw. Is food supposed to smoke like that? Zeltorx felt his long, distinguished academic career inching towards a complete nervous breakdown. This module was supposed to teach about the galaxy's deadliest plants, not showcase why humans were culinary terrors. And yet, the human was perfectly fine, content, even cheerful. That was the problem. That was always the problem with humans. The professor cleared his throat. Gathering what little dignity he had left, he had accepted his fate. Class, today we learn not about Deathworld flora, but about humans. He pointed a shaking claw directly at Elias, because clearly, they are immune to sanity.
The moment Elias opened the second container from his lunchbox, the entire alien classroom descended into survival mode. A wave of hot, spicy vapor rolled out like a hunting predator, instantly filling the air. Several students bolted upright in panic. One hissed. Another fainted quietly onto their desk. Professor Zeltorx, the esteemed xenobiologist, wheezed and slammed the emergency filtration button with a shaking claw. The vents roared to life, but then struggled and coughed like dying machinery, clearly overwhelmed. Humalius, he croaked, his voice strained. What substance have you just released into my classroom? Elias just blinked innocently. These, it's just buffalo chicken. A Hilverian student let out a strangled cry from the back. It burns my eyes. Elias looked around, genuinely confused. Seriously? This is mild. My roommate back home eats stuff way hotter than this. Professor Zell. Torx pressed both claws against his chest sacs, trying to steady his breathing. Mild. This human just called an airborne irritant that nearly overpowered industrial-grade vents. Mild. Trying desperately to rescue his lecture from total chaos, he summoned the next hologram. A pulsing blue pod materialized in the center of the room, twitching as if it contained a heartbeat. This, the professor announced, his tone strained but determined, is the Narath spore pot, an extremely corrosive plant. Inhaling its vapor will dissolve organic matter within. Elias sniffed the air curiously. Smells kinda like durian. The entire class froze. Every eye was on the human. Professor Zeltorx's head frills shot straight up in alarm. You recognize the scent of a lethal corrosive agent. Elias just shook his head. Not lethal, he corrected matter-of-factly. Durian's just a really strong fruit my aunt loves. It makes the whole house stink, but it's delicious. Avral medic, nearby. Quickie slapped a respirator onto his own face. Someone whispered in horrified awe. Humans willingly inhale toxic vapors for pleasure. Elias raised a hand. Again, not toxic. That is not reassuring, Professor Zell, Torx muttered under his breath. He decided to move on, switching to the next specimen, an acid-dripping vine, twisting with menacing neon thorns. This, he explained, his voice shaking slightly, is the Xerenix blood vine. Its toxin is known to liquefy biological tissue on contact. Elias squinted at the hologram. Looks like a chili plant, he said casually. The professor nearly dropped his datapad. A chili? Elias shrugged. Yeah, it's a plant from Earth. They're spicy. They won't melt your organs, though. Well, maybe just your will to live for a few minutes, if you get a really hot one. To prove his point, he reached into his lunchbox again, pulled out a bright red pepper, and took a bite. The class screamed again, a symphony of alien terror. A slithery student hissed. He devours pain for nourishment. Elias chewed thoughtfully, oblivious to the panic he was causing. It's not even that hot. Professor Zeltorx was now completely certain he was living a nightmare. Humilias, he said, his voice cracking. Please, eat nothing else in this classroom. Okay, Elias replied agreeably, and then unwrapped something else. Every alien recoiled in unison. Whoa. Relax, Elias said, confused by their horror. It's a granola bar, just oats and honey. A Lurkan warrior in the front row whispered reverently to his classmate. He consumes compressed rations, raw, without rehydration. But the final, devastating blow came when, in a later discussion about planetary defenses, Elias mentioned poison ivy. Poison what? Professor Zeltorix asked, dreading the answer. It's a plant back home, Elias explained. If you touch it, it makes you itchy. Itchy? The professor repeated, horrified. A necrotic shrub that causes cellular decay only makes you... Elias shrugged again. I guess humans are just built tough. The room fell silent. It was a silence filled with terror, enlightenment, and deep, deep trauma. Professor Zeltorix stared at the human, at the still-fuming lunchbox, and at the half-dissolved filtration vent sputtering in the corner. In that moment, he understood a profound and terrifying truth. Humans were unimmune to the horrors of a Deathworld. They had simply adapted to it. They had normalized it, and no xenobiology curriculum in the entire galaxy had ever prepared him for that. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Professor Zeltorix decided that if he couldn't stop the human from terrifying the class, he might at least redirect their fear into something educational. That was, after all, the noble duty of a teacher. He tabbed his holodisplay and summoned a containment sphere from the ceiling. We will now conduct a controlled demonstration, he announced, though his voice trembled like a malfunctioning ventilator. Inside this shield is a specimen so dangerous, it requires triple-layer protection. The sphere descended, and inside floated a writhing crimson bulb surrounded by shimmering air distortions. Vorak's student whispered, Is that the Red Howler? Zeltorix nodded gravely. Yes. A plant capable of producing airborne toxins that induce hallucinations, paralysis, and Elias, the human, stepped closer. Oh, looks like a Carolina Reaper. The entire class flinched. Zeltorix felt a part of his soul leave his body. A what? He croaked. Carolina Reaper, Elias explained casually. Earth pepper. Hottest thing I've ever eaten. My cousin grows them. Nearly sent me to the R. The first time, the aliens recoiled like he had physically struck them. You consumed it. A Helvarian screeched from the back row. Yeah, Elias said with a shrug. After a gallon of milk and a lot of crying, I was fine. Zeltorix stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. This plant, this galactic hazard you are telling me humans grow something comparable for culinary recreation. Elias just blinked. Is that weird? The professor covered his face with both claws, trying to process this revelation. Before he could even attempt to resume the lecture, the containment shield flickered ominously. A spark erupted from the generator. The classroom lights dimmed, and the Red Howler's toxins began to shimmer dangerously. Containment breach imminent, a calm AI voice announced from the ceiling. The students erupted into absolute panic. Chittering shrieks, frantic tail slaps, and the sound of panicked scrambling filled the room. Calm yourselves, Zeltorix shouted, his voice cracking. If the shield fails, the toxin will incapacitate you all in seconds. Elias tilted his head, sniffing the air. The toxin smells like vinegar. Is it some kind of acid? It is a neural disruptor. The professor barked, his panic rising. The shield flickered again, more violently this time. Just as Zeltorix prepared for the worst, Elias sighed, walked over to his backpack, and pulled out a full thing's a lunchbox ice pack. What are you doing? Zeltorix demanded, his eyes wide with disbelief. Cooling down the air intake, Elias said simply, placing the frozen pack directly against the overheating shield generator. Hot machinery overheats the easiest. Same trick I used on a dying AC unit back home. Miraculously, the sputtering machine stabilized. The shield brightened, its hum returning to a steady, reassuring frequency. The toxin's dangerous shimmer faded, safely contained once more. The entire class stared in silent, absolute awe. Elias casually dusted his hands off. There, That should hold for a while. Zeltorx blinked, his mind reeling from the whiplash of events. You just stabilized the lethal containment system, using a lunchbox accessory. Elias just shrugged. Hey, humans are good at improvising. The professor looked at his class-wide guide, trembling and completely speechless, and then back at the human who had just saved them all with an ice pack. At that moment, he realized the entire galaxy had misunderstood humans entirely. They weren't just survivors of their own insane Deathworld. They were experts in handling danger so casually that even lethal, galaxy-ending threats became nothing more than minor, everyday inconveniences. Zeltorx swallowed hard, a new kind of fear and respect dawning on him. We may need to reform the curriculum. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. After the containment scare, the classroom settled into a jittery, wide-eyed quiet. Professor Zeltorx paced back and forth in front of his desk, his claws tapping nervously on the smooth surface. Honestly, everything he had meticulously planned for the entire semester had already been completely derailed, and all by one enthusiastic human with a Deathworld appetite. But he had one last hope, one final ace up his sleeve. A practical exam. Class, he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the tense silence. Today you will face the botanical hazard gauntlet. He paused for effect. Its essay-controlled environment filled with holographic simulations of some of the galaxy's most lethal flora. I want to assure you, there are no real toxins, no actual physical threats. This is purely educational. A collective sigh of relief washed over the alien students. Elias, however, just looked curious. So, like a virtual field trip? He asked. Yes, Zeltorx confirmed, a little too quickly, and you will not, under any circumstances, attempt to touch, smell, or compare anything to food. Elias just grinned. No promises, he joked. The professor visibly flinched. The heavy doors to the gauntlet slid open with a hiss, releasing a cool, ethereal mist. Inside, a holographic jungle stretched out before them, a dazzling and terrifying landscape filled with shimmering neon vines, clouds of glowing spores, and plants that looked like they were ready to consume anything with a pulse. The class entered cautiously, stepping as if the floor were made of glass. Elias, on the other hand, entered like he was strolling through a local park on a Sunday afternoon. The first hazard flickered into view, a cluster of tall, slender stalks topped with pulsating red sacs that beat like tiny, exposed hearts. A Vurak student recited nervously from memory, the Krell, heart blossom. It releases powerful toxin bursts when startled. As if on cue, another student shuffled their feet and stepped just a little too close. Boom. The sac exploded, spraying a cloud of red vapor everywhere. Students shrieked and dove for cover, until they realized it was just harmless simulation gas. Zeltorx nodded approvingly. Correct. Now, can anyone identify how to avoid provoking it? Elias raised his hand. Don't step on its roots. Plants really hate that. The professor blinked his multiple eyes. That is, surprisingly, and actually, correct. They moved deeper into the simulated jungle, glowing. Acidic vines dangled from the holographic canopy like ethereal ropes of death. A group of Lurkin students whispered warnings about the Akora lashvine, a plant rumored to be capable of dissolving straight through military-grade armor. Elias just tilted his head, examining it. Ooh, looks kind of like poison ivy mixed with morning glories. A Helverian student yelped. Human, do not touch. But it was too late. Elias had already stepped calmly under the vine. The hologram snapped harmlessly in the air right above his head. The entire class just gaped at him. You knew its movement pattern, Zeltorx asked, his voice slow and disbelieving. Yeah. My grandma used to garden with wild vines. I learned to duck. The professor's frills puffed up in agitation. Gardening prepared humans for acidic lashvines. Wonderful. The next hazard was a glowing, pulsating mound on the forest floor. The Serenth Puffroom, famous for blasting paralytic spores strong enough to stop a charging Grolak. Suddenly, it began to pulse faster. "Everyone, get back!" shouted Zeltorx, his professional calm finally cracking. Elias just squinted at it. "It's gonna blow." The mushroom then detonated in a blinding burst of harmless light. The aliens screamed. Elias simply shielded his eyes with his arm. Flashbang. Timing. My cousin used to prank me with those all the time. Zeltorx looked like he was about to collapse. The gauntlet only escalated from there. Carnivorous blossoms with holographic teeth snapped at passing shadows. Spore clouds drifted through the air like sentient fog. Root traps burst from the ground, trying to ensnare their ankles. The students were utterly terrified. Elias navigated the entire course with the casual grace of someone stepping around puddles on a rainy sidewalk. By the time they reached the exit, the class wasn't just impressed. They were staring at him as though he were some kind of demigod of danger. Zeltarx could no longer deny the truth, staring him in the face. "Human Elias," he said quietly, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "I believe Earth has not merely prepared you for toxic flora, it has trained you." Elias just grinned. "Yeah. Earth plants are kind of aggressive." Zeltorx leaned in and whispered to himself, "Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying." Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.